Hello, thank you for joining the Food Safety Educational Conference as part of the 2021 Virtual Southeast Regional Fruit and Vegetable Conference. I am Ashley Hoppers, the Agriculture and Natural Resources Extension Agent with UGA Extension for Gilmer and Fanning counties, and I'm going to be the moderator for this presentation. I'd first like to thank Highland Ag Solutions for sponsoring the 2021 Food Safety Educational Conference. Before we begin with the presentation, let's first watch the short video provided by Highland Ag Solutions.
Highland is virtualizing the business of agriculture. From soil to sale, we are uniting growers, packers, marketers, and their customers in ways never done before. In today's global marketplace, competition has never been fiercer. You need innovative tools to provide business and market transparency for the industry to remain sustainable for future generations.
Next, I would like to discuss pesticide CEU and CCA credits, which are available for most presentations offered during the live Southeastern Regional Conference. Check the Pesticide CEU Guide for, first, a list of approved presentations, and secondly, all participating states. The Pesticide CEU Guide is located in the Event Resources tab, which is right under the Media player. The guide is also available at the Resources Center, located on the main menu of the conference platform. Please note, pesticide credits will only be available for those who are registered attendees and only during live conference presentations. Credits, therefore, will not be made available for on-demand viewing. As far as the pesticide CEU process goes, there's a simple three-step process to receive credits. First, you're going to need to go to the audience chat box, which is located on the left side of your screen, and type your first name, last name, and the states for which you're requesting credits. Again, all you need to do is go to the audience chat box located on the left side of your view screen and type your first name, last name, and the states for which you are requesting credits. You will need to do this for every presentation to request CEU credits. The second step is to remember to sign out at the end of every presentation. To sign out, again, go to the chat box and type your first name, last name, and the states for which you are requesting credits. You will be reminded to sign out at the end of the presentation, so please don't forget this important step. The third step is to complete the pesticide CEU registration. You only have to complete this step one time during the conference, so it's not required with every presentation. To access the pesticide CEU registration, open the Pesticide CEU Guide on the Event Resources tab located under the Media player. The Pesticide CEU registration web link is located on the front cover of the guide. I do think it's important to make sure everyone's aware that this presentation is pre-recorded to reduce any technical difficulties. We will be answering your questions live at the end of the presentation, and you can submit a question at any point during this presentation by typing your question in the questions box and pressing send. Of course, don't forget to thank our 2021 conference sponsors and exhibitors by visiting the virtual trade show and featured products pavilion. You're also welcome to join us each morning for coffee chats and each evening for networking. Check the conference agenda for details. Now that all of that's out of the way, I would like to introduce Dr. Laurel Dunn, Assistant Professor and Food Safety Extension Specialist in the Department of Food Science and Technology at the University of Georgia. Laurel graduated with her bachelor's and master's degrees and doctorate in food science from the University of Tennessee before completing her postdoc at the University of Georgia. For the past 2.5 years at UGA, Laurel's research and extension programs have largely focused on microbial hazards associated with fresh produce and intervention strategies to reduce the risk of produce-associated foodborne illness. Today, she is going to lead a discussion in food safety for blueberry and other small fruit growers.
Thank you, Ashley. So as Ashley said, I'm the Food Safety Extension Specialist focusing on produce at the University of Georgia, and I'm located in the Athens campus, but I'm technically supposed to cover everyone in the state. And so because of that, today we're going to cover some of our more southern region, I guess for me at least, growers, particularly our blueberry growers, and just kind of do a basic discussion on some best practices to ensure food safety. And so we're going to focus on kind of three main things today. Obviously, these are not the only things we need to worry about with food safety, but we're going to kind of discuss our worker training and hygiene practices. These have become even more important recently with COVID. I'm going to go into some equipment sanitation recommendations, and then just a brief discussion on our pre-harvest water quality. So I just kind of wanted to start out with our worker training and hygiene, because it's important that any worker that ever is going to be touching any food or any food contact surfaces, they have to receive food safety training for any tasks where they might be involved in handling food. And ideally, and most of your audits or regulations will require this training to be updated at a minimum of once a year. However, you need to keep in mind, if you have an annual training for all of your workers, anytime you hire new workers or a crew of seasonal workers comes on, or if you just have volunteers who may not be on your payroll, but are wanting to spend some time working with you, these people need to receive that food safety training as well, because they can just as likely introduce food safety hazards to our berries. And so make sure too, as you're doing this, you're impressing on them the importance of staying home when they're sick. We're concerned, obviously, if they have foodborne illness symptoms. So if they have diarrhea or vomiting or things like that, that they're not handling the food and maybe spraying it to the consumers. But now, because of COVID and because it is so contagious, we're also concerned about sick workers staying home to protect our other workers. So that way one sick person doesn't show up and knock out our entire crew. Also, make sure if you're going to reassign sick workers who are kind of, well enough to be there, but maybe not handling food, make sure that they have a reassigned job that isn't touching food contact surfaces. So don't have them making boxes or handling, cleaning or sanitizing containers that produce might be going into, because if they contaminate those food contact surfaces, those bins, those boxes, that can spread easily to the produce that's being packed into them. And so I always hesitate to discuss hand washing so much, but there's a reason I really wanted to discuss it. So the CDC kind of came up with a review of pertinent literature. And so they found that hand washing can reduce diarrheal disease associated deaths by 50%. Worldwide, 1 million deaths annually could be prevented if everyone washed their hands. And also, this was data they found, or that was reported several years ago, but respiratory disease risk is reduced by 16% if everyone washes their hands. This data may be different with COVID because it's so contagious. We may be finding that hand washing is even more important for controlling that. So you kind of wonder, we tell everyone and all these adults to be washing their hands. So who isn't washing their hands after using the restroom? If you're like me, you assume everyone is. However, 35% of women do not wash their hands after using the restroom. Guys, I'm about to pick on you because it turns out that 69% of men are not washing their hands after using the restroom. So make sure that you're discussing hand washing in your worker training. So you'll find that, your workers are going to be rolling their eyes at you while you're telling them to wash their hands. But keep in mind, if you have a room full of men working, there's a good chance that 69% of them are not washing their hands after they use the restroom. So, it feels silly to have this conversation with adults, but it's adults who aren't washing their hands. So make sure that they understand the importance and how hand washing does prevent a whole slew of diseases. So, we require this hand washing component make sure when you have this training, you go into how you wash your hands. So the 20 seconds, getting between the fingers, using soap. You might have an audit that requires a certain water temperature. Warm water might be required by an audit. So if you have that, you'll need to make sure that you're providing that. Make sure that you're updating on the frequency. So how often do you want people washing their hands? And you need to train your workers on what recontamination of their hands looks like. So I was in South Florida a few years ago on a blueberry operation, and we saw a crew come in. They all washed their hands really thoroughly before they went out and started picking. And so when they'd finished filling a bucket, they would go and empty it into the bins that were loaded on the back of the truck. As we're standing next to the truck, we looked down and we noticed that there was this animal feces. I think it was coyote scat next to the truck. So, we saw that, but it was well away from the blueberries. There wasn't a good way for that fecal material to get onto the blueberries. So we thought. But as we're watching these workers who are trying to get the job done, are working quickly, they're running back and forth to this truck. And as they're running, they have their buckets full of berries, and they're attached around their waist by a cord or a fabric strap. And so as they're running to the truck, they untie the strap, and they hold the bucket of berries, but the strap is dragging along the ground right where that fecal material is. Then when they're emptying the bins or the buckets into the bins, that strap was flying over. It was touching all the berries that may have already been poured in the bins. Then they pulled their bucket back down, and as they were returning back to resume peeing at their spot, they had to retie that strap around their waist. And while they were doing that, they were contaminating their hands with the strap that had been drug on the ground and had been near this animal feces. So include examples like that. A worker might not realize that, obviously those workers hadn't realized what they'd done. So maybe give them some examples of, this is how your hands get dirty again. This is when you need to stop and rewash your hands, and really incentivize that behavior. Don't dock people for washing their hands when they recontaminate, but encourage that. So if you're going to require hand washing, if you're going to require people use sanitary facilities so that people aren't doing their business in your field, you need to make it convenient. You need to have places near the field, and you need to keep them clean. So you don't want someone's best option to be, doing something in the field because your restroom facilities are so poorly maintained. So what we want is something that looks like this. So a system that can be, closely located to the field, but not in the field. If you notice kind of to the left in this picture, it's a little hard to see, but that's a hand washing station to the left of this. So people can use the facility, they can step outside and then wash their hands and not have a risk of recontaminating their hands. What we don't want is something like this. So first of all, these contained units, they might have hand washing stations on the inside, but again, we know 70% of a certain demographic don't appear to wash their hands after using the restroom. So if you were to wash your hands in one of these and then hold the door handle to get out, you would likely be recontaminating your hands. You definitely don't want situations where you have these tipping over. These do tip over at times, though. So, be prepared for this. Have a plan when it happens. In this case, you'd call the company to come and deal with it. You'd also mark out, or mark off the area where any material may have spilled and have a plan to contain it. So as far as your equipment goes, you need to make sure that you're frequently cleaning and maintaining your equipment, and this includes your harvesting equipment. So we see a lot of times our mechanical harvesters are getting really neglected when it comes to our cleaning and sanitation programs. So these harvesters, they handle the berries. Not only do they handle berries as they're going through and shaking the bushes, they're also removing any bird feces or any other material that you might not want mixed in with the berries. And so the machines themselves are getting contaminated every time they go to a new bush. So I'm not saying, clean between every bush or every row or anything like that, but do have a regular cleaning schedule where you go in and you clean and then sanitize these pieces of equipment. And keep in mind, you need the schedule for any harvest bins, any baskets, conveyors, tables, anything that might be coming in contact with our produce. So just because this is a big piece of equipment that's used in the field, don't neglect it, because it's one of those things that contacts all the berries coming off the bush. So when I say cleaning and sanitizing, you're probably sick of hearing the food safety people discuss this, but just to kind of reiterate, cleaning is where we're removing the excess soil. And usually we do this, this can be starting out with the dry or wet method. We're removing anything we see visibly, and then we're applying a detergent and scrubbing that so we get that physical action to dislodge. Particularly in produce, we're dealing with a lot of high carbohydrates and sugar containing soils, so we want that detergent. You want to then rinse that detergent off. Anytime you apply water to any of your food contact surfaces, you need to make sure that you're using potable water. So it has to be water that basically you would be willing to drink, needs to be what is touching these surfaces. And then after you have a clean surface, you have a rinsed surface, then you can apply your sanitizer. You'll need to make sure that your sanitizer, one, is labeled for use on food contact surfaces. And then you'll need to follow that EPA label to make sure that you're using the correct concentration and allowing the correct contact time for contact surfaces, for food contact surfaces. You might be using a sanitizer that will require a rinse. If you're an organic producer and you're using something like chlorine, you again might be required to have a freshwater rinse after you apply that sanitizer. So just be aware, you might have different, more strict guidelines, but you always have to follow that EPA label. So kind of changing gears quickly here, with our production water or our pre-harvest water, it's probably what you hear us say more. You need to know what is in that production water. So you should be familiar with sending off water tests. Generally, when you send an irrigation water test off to the lab will give you results for 2 different organisms. One will be total coliforms. Generally, we're very interested with our total coliforms with drinking water. So you might not be as interested in the total coliform numbers, but you will be definitely interested in your generic E. coli numbers. So these are the ones that a lot of our regulations, produce safety rule in particular, and then a lot of our audits rely on to determine what an appropriate water quality is for that use, and particularly if that water is going to be coming in direct contact with the portion of the plant that you eat, so the berry in this case. So keep in mind your testing frequency is going to be dictated by the water source. So surface water is typically considered a higher risk water source because you get animals in and out of that water and things like that. Our municipal water is kind of our lowest risk, and then well water, that risk varies based on the quality and the depth of your well. So you'll have to follow the most stringent audit or regulatory requirement for your operation, and that'll dictate some of your testing frequencies and what generic E. coli quantities are allowed. So know the quality of the water that'll be touching the edible portion, and keep in mind this may include not only our irrigation water that tends to be what people think about, irrigation water, you need to make sure that's good, but keep in mind foliar sprays or any sprays that might be contacting the berries anytime you're mixing water with any chemicals. That water, you want to be aware of the quality, and also for frost protection. A lot of times we frost protect early in the season. But you can have, if you have berries present, you definitely want to be sure what that water quality is going on to those plants. So as far as our water testing frequencies, I've kind of already said this, it'll vary based on our audit and our regulatory requirements, but our surface water typically requires our most frequent testing because it is the most variable. So a lot of our schemes, a lot of our regulations require about 4 to 5 times a year. Some may require more than that. Our well water, we typically recommend testing once a year for those generic E. coli levels. And if you're using a well, it's really a responsibility to make sure that you're protecting that well, you're protecting the water within it. And if you missed it yesterday, in the Food Safety Educational Conference, we had a talk by Dr. Gary Hawkins, our water specialist at UGA, where he went into, how do you protect your well, determining, is your well safe? How do you treat it if you have issues? So if you missed it, I recommend you go back and listen to that talk. And then if you have municipal water, just update your records annually to verify that the municipality is treating that water to a potable drinking standard. So if you do have consistently poor water quality, there there are treatment options and interventions you can put in place. A lot of people pulling out surface water will rely on things like sand filters. These are great for reducing turbidity, removing particulate matter out of water. They don't do much for reducing microorganisms within the water, however, so don't install a sand filter thinking you're going to totally take care of your microbial issues. You can install antimicrobial pesticide devices. These include things like ultraviolet light. So that'll be a little cylinder you'll attach to your irrigation line or other line that will use that UV light to treat and kill microorganisms in the water. Other things like ozone generators or other filtration systems. And you can actually use antimicrobial pesticides that you might be using in post-harvest or sanitation operations. So our bleach, our peroxyacetic acid, you can use these in low levels for irrigation water. You just need to make sure if you are going to use an antimicrobial pesticide, the label needs to include an EPA registration label, registration number. It needs to have instructions for treating irrigation water. And keep in mind, you might have different state or local regulations or requirements that you have to follow as well as the label. And so just one note with our antimicrobial pesticides, so our bleach, our PAA, currently there aren't chemical pesticides that are labeled for use against foodborne pathogens in irrigation water. This doesn't mean you can't use it for that purpose because, you know, we assume if we add bleach to the water, we're taking care of a lot of our plant pathogens. Those are very similar organisms to our things like E. coli and Salmonella and our foodborne pathogens. But because the EPA label doesn't say this treats foodborne pathogens in irrigation water, you're still going to need to have frequent water tests, and you're going to need, you know, likely a on-farm validation to prove that these antimicrobial pesticides are killing or controlling not only our plant pathogens, keeping our emitters clean or our drip tape clean, but that they're also reducing our foodborne pathogens to an adequate level. So you'll still likely need to be sending off frequent water tests, even if you do use an antimicrobial pesticide. However, this will change, and so do keep your eye out for these EPA labels and these, you know, talk to your suppliers, because we do expect a lot of our common pesticides to soon be labeled for use against foodborne pathogens in irrigation water. So I'm not going to dive into this right now because we could spend a full day talking about irrigation water treatment, and actually we do talk a full day about it. A team out of Tennessee, Florida, Washington State, they're listed on the slide, developed a full day workshop called Bridging the Gaps, approaches for treating irrigation water on farm. It's a full day that goes into the pros and cons of different treatment techniques, how to apply them, how to use them on your farm. This was an in-person workshop. Once COVID hit, the team took it to a full format. So if this is something you're interested in, you're welcome to send me an email and I can try to help you figure out where the next one's going to be. We're in the process of getting them scheduled for 2021, and pretty much in most of these states that are listed. Also, if you want more information on water treatment resources, you may have missed it yesterday, but we had Dr. Rock from University of Arizona go into in-field water treatment options and deciding what was best for you. So if you missed it yesterday, I would encourage you to go back and listen to her presentation if you think water treatment might be something that you're interested in. So that is all I have for today. I know I threw a lot in a quick time, but I appreciate you listening if you made it this far. And I'm always happy to take questions, especially from our Georgia growers, but I'm willing to help field any questions in general that might have to do with produce safety. So thank you. And Ashley, I will turn it back to you.